Dear listener, happy Monday. Another week on the Quarter Hour. G'day, showbiz. How are you?
Good to see you, Radio, and just loving the fact that we're just doing a daily episode and being able to connect with people in Australia that love radio like we do. There's always something to talk about.
Are you surprised that there's so much? I am.
You know, it's been our life for 30-something years. I mean, when you're in the lane, that's all you see is what's in the lane. And so it's nice to be able to debrief and chat to people and just, hear what people are thinking and feeling. And at the end of the day, we all love it. So it's great to be able to talk about that.
Yeah, it is. Now, I got a chance of a lifetime. I've always wanted to sit down and have a chat to Ross Stevenson. In my head, we're having a beer at the footy, or we're kind of like having a nice long lunch or something like that. And because I know he's such a great conversationalist. So having a podcast is just an excuse really to have a chat to him. And I was listening back to it, and I didn't really have to edit it at all, which is always a good sign, right? And I was listening to it thinking, now, how much have I strayed into the fanboy lane here, and it's just me and him having a chat versus what is interesting to people listening. So I gave you the task and said, all right, I'm going to come up with a list of things that I think are lessons people can learn. And I said, have a listen, and you come up with your top 3. So what did you come up with?
Well, firstly, what was funny was you were in total fanboy lane, and that's great because even as fans of radio, we've got people that we love, and obviously he's been a massive part of your life. Now, my 3AW experience was at the other end of the day. So when I was working with you in Albury Wodonga, we would get 3AW on relay on 3NE in Wangaratta, and I used to love Bruce and Phil at night.
Bruce and Phil. Yeah.
So I was starting work at 4 a.m. in the morning, but I would stay up and listen. I couldn't go to bed until I heard Phil say goodnight at midnight every night.
Oh.
So it was just like your granddad saying goodnight to you. So I had a love affair with 3AW. I'd hear Phil say goodnight, and then I would go to bed and get up at 4 a.m. And I feel like the same with you. You're up at 5 a.m. to hear Ross's first break every day. So there was a lot of admiration there, which I loved. Not being as familiar with his day-to-day, I was fascinated by the chat. He is top of his game. Like, he's just so impressive in so many ways. And I walked away from your chat having 3 or 4 questions of my own. Before I dissect it, like, does he write his own contracts being a lawyer? What does he think of Darren Hinch? And who tried to poach you over the years? Surely someone has tried to poach the number 1 talent in Melbourne radio. You know, when they tried that Melbourne Talk radio station, surely he was top of their list back in the day, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. He's such a fascinating guy because I don't think I've ever met anyone, and we all know people who are like this, but I've never met anyone who on the air and off the air are exactly the same person. Now, we know everyone's authentic and we do a version, but I mean, even listening to the Game Changers interview with Kyle, which we'll talk about in a sec, that was the most Kyle I've ever heard Kyle. And then you compare it to him on the radio, and he's performance Kyle. He's, pantomime villain Kyle, sort of. It's a version of. But I can tell you from sitting down with Ross, having listened to Ross for so long and sitting down with him, I almost felt like I was on the air because he was like exactly the same person. It was quite fascinating, but also heartening to see.
And I wonder whether that's part of the secret to his success is that he doesn't, even though he must love radio, he doesn't seem like a radio guy. He was just chatting, and the bits and pieces I've heard on the air, this is the same guy. Like, there was no amplification of the voice. There was no putting anything on. He was just having a general, it was as if you were having a pie at the footy. And that's exactly how he sounded. So I'll give you my top 3 takeaways, what I learned about him as a listener to your fanboy interview. And I was so happy for you as well. Like, I love it when you meet someone that you've just had on that pedestal, and I love it even more when they turn out to be nice. Yeah. Like, he just seemed like you loved hanging out with him. I took away, number 1, humility. That was the number 1 thing. It never seemed to be about him. He just has this inquisitive mind, and that was enough for him. It wasn't about him. It was about you. Even when he was chatting to you, he was asking you questions. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll find out about Wade later. But he was just inquisitive about you. And I just thought, that's humility you can't buy. So that's obviously ingrained in him, his upbringing. What did he say? He was a Brisbane Presbyterian or something like that. You could hear that. There was an absolute humility that I think is one of the major keys of his success.
Yeah, absolutely. And it made my first question, because you could imagine how nervous I was, right? Thinking like fanboy moment. It made my first question so easy because I knew exactly what it would be. It's that he would rather be interviewing me because he's curious about other people and he doesn't like talking about himself. So that made my first question easy. It's like, you'd rather be in my chair, wouldn't you? You don't talk
I
about
mean, the
yourself. So
elephant in the room was you quoted back to him stuff he'd said 26 years ago, and I was like, where's
stalker.
the fine line between fan and stalker, Wade? Like you knew all the good lines, and that's what I
Yeah.
love. My second takeaway was that he knows what people are talking about and leaning in. I
Mm.
loved the fact that he was in a pub and that he heard people talking about whispers and rumors and gossip. And he said, let's create a rumor file. And I just thought, that is so cool. And Steve Price used to say that. Steve Price said many years ago he would catch the tram to work. He'd be pretending to skim the paper, but what he was doing was listening to the conversation in the tram.
Yep.
And I can only relate it back to when you and I were working in Albury Wodonga. And I remember being there in our first year there, I felt we were kind of struggling on air, just a little bit, trying to get some traction in a new town. And it wasn't until we did a break on local football. Now, we're not talking AFL, we're talking Ovens and Murray football.
Yeah.
I have never been stopped more on a street about a segment than talking about local football. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, well, maybe we're onto something here. That's what people want to talk about. We'll whack it on a Monday and a Friday. And so he's like, people want gossip and chit chat. He whacks it every day. Like it's same, but different, small fry in our own world. Find out what they want and lean in on that, which I thought was, I mean, the fact that he invented the rumor file, they've
Well,
tried
it's
it in
funny
other
that
markets.
because in my head I'd thought he'd invented the rumor file, and then when I was doing some research before the interview, because I thought, I got to get my dates right and make sure I don't want to embarrass myself, and ChatGPT actually said that the rumor file was there before him, so that's why I kind of framed the question that way. But just on that notion of listening in, that was a very famous thing that John Brennan, the PD of 2UE in the Alan Jones, John Laws era, did. He used to tell people that he loved going to the footy and not for the game. He would sit and listen to other people's conversations. He'd move seats and at halftime he'd listen in and he'd hear when they were talking about, oh, mortgage is expensive. And he used that as a rich vein of information. And I think that's a great takeaway for anyone is, I wonder how much time we spend in studios. I mean, maybe remote nowadays, but we're not out catching public transport. We're not out just standing at the bar having a quiet beer with it on ourselves just to listen in. The art of eavesdropping is something that's really important, I think, for all content makers.
Ray Hadley used to say it when he was driving cabs. He used
Yep.
to hear what they talk about in the cabs.
Yep.
Marto, who hosts the Triple M Breakfast Show in Brisbane, is also a tradie during the day. So he
Yep.
knows what the tradies are talking about throughout the
Yeah.
day. I mean, he does his breakfast show, then he goes and builds houses throughout the day. He knows what the tradies are talking about on site. So just being able to tap into your market in whatever
Yeah.
way, whether it's going to the footy, catching a bus, hanging out in a car park somewhere. We used to do the same thing when I was EP at KISS. We'd go to the drop off with the mums in the afternoon,
Yep.
and mums would get there half an hour early. You'd sit around a table and you'd just start throwing out chit chat and see what stuck.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
okay, everyone's talking about Chris Hemsworth. Okay, maybe we'll
Who
lean in on
knows?
that. So it's just finding where your market's at and leaning. Like Rumor File is a classic example.
Yep. Number 3.
The tone of his delivery. Now, I don't even think he knows he does this. He was hypnotic in the way he spoke. So he's got this timbre in his delivery. He does light and shade. He pauses. Even when he's talking to you, he'd whack in the odd whisper. I was like, what? And then he'd get a little bit louder. It was hypnotic. Now, I don't believe that he did that deliberately, but his delivery was a masterclass in how your voice, your pace, your instrument, and getting the most out of the words that you speak actually matters.
Yeah.
And he has a beautiful hypnotic tone. And even you were saying the way he'd help you remember things. I wonder how much of his voice had to do with that, because and look, he's blessed with a beautiful voice. And is it the deepest voice? Is it the best voice? No, but the way he speaks just had me captured, and I thought that's part of his appeal.
Yeah, I think it's also one of those things that we underestimate how much our voice means in our broadcasting or our podcasting career. And the way I like to think about this is because I know I don't have the best voice. I can sound a bit nasally or a bit whiny in my voice. I left a gap there for you to say no, but don't worry. I can be like that. But what I do know about myself is I know when to emphasize something. I do know when to go, and now I'm making a point. And I'm not sure if that's a drama sort of thing or a theatrical sort of thing, but Ross has put that into his natural conversational style. I'm not sure if he's always had it or it's something he's learned to do. But I know there are plenty of broadcasters that I listen to, or podcasts I listen to, and what they're really good at is, maybe storytelling and speaking naturally. But I think the art of a performance, I don't mean performative as in like pretending to, but the art of using the range and scale of the way you enunciate.
Absolutely.
Clearly it used to be more important because that's pretty much what people hired for, the sound of your voice. Now it's actually a lot more than that, which is good. But it's still something that's a weapon in your toolkit to be able to.
He would hold on to words. For emphasis, he'd hold on to a word, he'd hold on to a tone. And even if he didn't know he was doing it, he knew how to get you to listen.
Yeah, he did.
And it's a very interesting skill. And I listened to him going, man, this guy's good. But I mean, you've been listening to him forever. What was your number one takeaway? What did you learn the most about chatting to him?
Well, the thing that was most surprising to me, because for me, there was a clear reason why I think he's the best. And I mentioned it in the podcast. And it was surprising to me that he said he's not doing it intentionally, was this memory encoding piece. Now, what I was trying to get across to him is that if I was to say to you, tell me anything that you heard on radio last week, even for us in the industry, it's really, really hard to recall that, right? You might remember something you heard this morning, but a week ago you can't. And as I was doing prep for that interview, I'm thinking, why can I remember all these things, which are inconsequential things? It's not like I remember he told me when Princess Diana died, he told that funny story about Rex Hunt telling him. But I don't remember big moments. What I remember are small moments. And I think it's because his turn of phrase combined with the way he used his voice, as you pointed. But these were unique things. These were unique things, and they're not catchphrases. They're not kind of like, here, I'm trying to trick you. But his ability to be able to say something that sticks because of how he says it and when he says it and what it is, that glue.
But do you think is that deliberate? Like you talked about this memory encoding.
He said no, right? But if it's not deliberate, which I have to believe it's not because he says it's not, it's just such a master skill. Because if I was to say to you, like I said, what did you remember from last week? I listened to heaps of podcasts, you probably do. I don't really remember what's said. I might remember what it was about. But, there are certain things that stand out to people. And you said, like, with the local footy team stuff, right? When you're on the air, it must mean something to them. But he does so much of it every single day that I think, I didn't get a chance to listen to him much this week because I've been busy. But next week, if you said to me at the end of the week, tell me 3 things Ross said, I'd probably be able to say it. And one might have been a turn of phrase. One might be like a rhyming slang. The other might be the end of a joke or something. But he's an encoder. And I think for people who want to learn anything from Ross, it's make what you say unique and make how you say it unique. If you can get that combo going, which is ultimately so hard to do, but that kind of helps you in terms of staying in people's mind. And when there's so much content, so many podcasts, so much radio to listen to, how someone says something and what they say, getting that glue to stick is really, really tricky, but it's worth practicing, I reckon. It's worth a off-air practice to go, all right, I could say it like this, but if I say it like that, will someone remember it more?
Someone who does it very well on air musically is Jamie Angel, who's, in my opinion, the best jock in Australia ever. And I can remember.
Is he still on the air though? Or he's behind
every now and again. I mean, he's the Triple M content head, and he did a break back in about 1995 that still rattles my brain. Where he comes off the back of that song "Cut and Move, Give It Up," and I remember he came off the back of it and he said, "Cut and move, sounds like a hair salon in Barden," and I just remember thinking, "What?" And I remember it 30 years later. In fact, when I was on air at KISS, I stole it 30 years later and used it myself. I'm like, that's a good line, Jamie. I'm going to use that. But just to intertwine the word craft, it's a skill you got to learn. You got to learn how to do it.
It's a skill you got to learn. All right, we're nearly out of time for today, but 2 quick things. One, reflection on Kyle's interview with Craig and Irene on Game Changers. Did you have a listen?
Loved it for so many reasons. I love the vulnerability. I felt sad for him. And I felt there were parts where he was hurting and he was showing that. But I'm also excited. We're moving forward. Let's go. Let's look forward to what's coming next. So that part excited me.
Yeah, I liked hearing him as him. I think what you hear sometimes on the air is the performer, the kind of the pantomime villain-ish. And look, he's really good at what he does. So he knows when to dial it up and dial it down. But I could tell that he was just the most comfortable and relaxed with those two And that's what I think that's what made it a great chat. Is he came to it? They got him at the right place at the right time, right headspace, and he gave everything. And I thought the questions were great. I think Reenie did a really good job of trying to find just those moments of like, what's been the worst moment you've had in the last, all those things that we actually want to know, were really good. So I enjoyed it. Well done to Craig and Reenie. Can't pretend I'm not professionally jealous because I am, but I think it was a great chat. Now, we have got some great chats coming up this week on the quarter hour.
Can we announce what we're doing this week? Can we announce that now?
We can announce it now because, as you know, I went to New Zealand a couple of weeks ago on assignment. I love the way you said that, like I'm some sort of, I don't know, 60 Minutes reporter with the George Negus with the jacket over my shoulder in a war zone. I just literally hopped the Tasman. We are doing Kiwi Week. Now, Kiwi Week is a celebration of not all things Dean Buchanan, although we probably should get him to do some voice imaging for it. In fact, I might do that later in the week. I might get Dean to do some voiceovers. It's a celebration of great shows in New Zealand. So before I tell you what I did, who did you chat to?
I caught up with Andrew Curtis, who's one half of the breakfast team of Rima FM out of Auckland. Rima is one of the oldest networks in New Zealand. They've got stations peppered all over the country, so a national show out of Auckland. But we really hone in on the fact that there's 44 radio stations in Auckland. What's it like being in probably the busiest radio market in the world?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge market over there. And also in Auckland, I spoke to Maddie and PJ. So PJ, well known, of course, for Jason PJ, and before it became Jason Lawrence. I caught up with Maddie and PJ, asked PJ what she thought about what's been going on back in Australia. So that's fascinating. Also caught up with John O'Ben and Megan from The Hits breakfast show. And I caught up with one other show. And I'm not going to tell you who it is, but it is the show that's lighting up everyone's social feeds at the moment. And that chat is coming later in the week. So once again, Showbiz, another big week we've got coming up on the quarter hour. Can't wait.